post-colonial varieties of English. That's basically this the study, the field of world Englishes. All right. So we have different models of world English, world Englishes. This one is from MacArthur, the Circle of World English, and this one is from Strevens. That is also the another model of the spread of English. Okay, so mostly world Englishes is a term for emerging, localized, or indigenized varieties of English, especially varieties that have well, that become more and more difficult to categorize speakers of English, particularly if we could have like this dichotomy of English as a native language or native English or non-native English. So it becomes very controversial when we talked about those issues. So another very brief general picture of speakers of English. But again, the numbers, those numbers are complicated, and we cannot just have those fixed numbers. English as a native language, English as a second language, English as a foreign language. But as we say, that it all becomes complicated to label people into different categories. All right, so we also need to be very careful because, for example, English as a native language, ENL, is not a single variety of English. And also pidgins and creoles do not fit into the categorization, right? So this morning I also read um, an article. It's about that language used in Papua New Guinea. That's the Creole, the situation, pidgins and Creoles. Yeah. So it's very complicated. Those do not fit into the three circle categorization. And also there are large groups of ENL speakers in ESL territories and vice versa. The models, yeah, the three circle model is based on the concept of monolingualism, but bi or multilingualism is the norm. So the linguistic resources, yeah, were basically neglected when we talk about this model. Yeah, also based on the basic distinction between native and non-native speakers, with the first group being considered superior, regardless of the quality of their language. All right, so that's from MacArthur. So we will see that the use of language um, has become more and more complicated, right? That the world English's model we see also from Cattell that the results of this extensive use of English over a long period has resulted in multi-canons of English and a shift of the canon. So we've got different norms, we've got different models of English use. So there is basically no one fits in all model of English. The two phases of English, okay, so whether the spread of English, the use of English as a global language is a blessing or curse. So two phases. One is the nativization, and another is Englishization. So nativization of English um, is about the contact has formally done to various varieties of English, as we mentioned, post-colonial varieties of English, while the other showing what impact the English language and literature have had on other languages of the world. For example, the Englishization of other languages of the world, whether the spread of English, the use of English as a global language will lead to language death, and how about the marginalization of minority language? That's about the famous argument of linguistic imperialism by Philipson, right?
Tapi dia dimatiin itunya.
Okay, so why world Englishes? So this is the first concept that I mentioned in the first section. So it's obvious that world Englishes provide a challenging opportunity to relate three academic areas: language, literature, and methodology. So also it's relevant to ELT, to English language teaching. What is the model or what is the norm, and whether we teach English by using a fixed single model. All right. So those are the questions for lecturers and students. Those we are stakeholders for stakeholders to ponder. Okay. The approach. The second one is the approach to world Englishes has to be cross-cultural and cross-linguistic. So we have various linguistic resources. Yeah. So Indonesia is a country with various languages, and I also speak dialect and languages and various ones here. So in those multilingual contexts, right? So how do we deal with those cross-cultural, cross-linguistic, intercultural or intracultural communications? The sources involve diverse cultures, languages, literatures in contact with English. And one has to have interdisciplinary perspectives focusing on the linguistic phase of world Englishes. Okay, and also what motivates the paradigm shifts that's relevant to ELT. So I think, like for me, the aim of language use and language learning language teaching is more like is to make professional and advanced students aware of the following aspects. Like the first one is the sociolinguistic profile of different speakers. Second one is the variety exposure. So we are no longer exposed to American or British English, the so-called standard one. So in reality, in like sociolinguistic realities, we need to have enough exposure to various um, different varieties of English, different accents. The third one is attitudinal neutrality. It means basically that like we are all human beings, so we have preference of like if you prefer this accent or that variety. But how do we develop this attitudinal neutrality from a sociolinguistic perspective? That there is no better or worse accent or language use in daily life, right? Given that those language use is intelligible. Okay, so the attitudinal neutrality. Number four is range of uses. Again, the register whether language used in formal context, in like informal context, different genres. Okay, constructive pragmatics. That's number five. Again, we don't simply follow grammatical use, but we also need to consider the pragmatic use of language, right? Um, Number six is multidimensional, okay, multidimensionality of functions. Again, multimodal language use. So not simply from the linguistic aspect. And the seven is cross-cultural intelligibility, yeah, and intercultural intelligibility. So a quick conclusion of the first um, section is that Cuttrell believes that for proper conceptualization and study of world Englishes, two types of shifts are needed. The first one is a paradigm shift in research, teaching, and application of sociolinguistic realities to the functions of English. Second is a shift from frameworks and theories which are essentially appropriate not to monolingual countries. So I think those are quite helpful for us, for lecturers or language, foreign language education professionals when we teach English as a language or we teach content courses through English. So those are quite relevant. We don't simply stick to the only norm or the only standard of English. So it's essential to recognize that world Englishes represent certain linguistic, cultural, and pragmatic realities and pluralism. And that pluralism is now an integral part of world Englishes and literatures written in Englishes. So I just put this in a plural form. So that is the first issue we'll need to notice. While English as a lingua franca, that's EFL. Again, it's like an extension from world Englishes. So the model, the study of world Englishes focuses on the post-colonial varieties. But as I mentioned, like English use in Indonesia, in China, in Russia, in Japan, in other contexts, for example, as a foreign language, right? So we need to notice that English is used as a lingua franca um, to help to facilitate communication among speakers of different first languages. So ELF focuses on pragmatic strategies required in intercultural communication. So the target model of English is a fluent, bilingual, or multilingual speaker, retaining a national identity in terms of accent and with special skills required to negotiate understanding with people from different lingual cultures. Um, this is the first resource I recommend students and lecturers if you're interested in English Next, why global English may mean the end of English as a foreign language by David Grado, that's published by British Council. It's open access, very, very helpful resource for us to understand a broad picture of the complexity of English. Okay, so for a long time, we learn English like in a classroom setting, that English is learned as a foreign language. We mentioned this is EFL. So we only learn or use English in the class. We learn native English, for example, British American English, and people are not confident when using English. For example, we are afraid of making grammatical mistakes. For example, we are not confident on our accents. Oh, how can we use English to communicate with people? I feel very inconfident. I don't want to use English and I feel less motivated, right? So because my English is poor. But from an English as a lingua franca perspective, ELF perspective, we learn English or we use English beyond the class. So English is no longer learned as a foreign language. English is used in various settings for various purposes, right? So the English that is used is assessed in terms of proficiency, intelligibility, and communicative success with people from multilingual backgrounds more than an English test. So we don't really compare like the score, like how many scores do you have when you use English in classroom setting. So we are no longer those lifelong language learners. We are not deficient language users, language learners, right? So from the ELF perspective, people are more competent language users. So we are users of English from the communicative level, from the pragmatic level. All right. So that is the model put forward by Jenkins back in 2006, that comparing EFL, English as a foreign language, and ELF. So EFL is more like from a deficit perspective, transfer, interference, and fossilization metaphors, conformative, monolingual bias, while code switching or code mixing are regarded as interference errors. But from an ELF perspective, it's the difference perspective, context, evolution, metaphor, transformative, bilingual, while code switching and code mixing are regarded as bilingual resources. Okay, so it's different. It's no longer a foreign language learned for communication with its native speakers. So it's a world language whose speakers communicate mainly with other non-native speakers, often from different first languages rather than their own. All right. Again, this is not the best model. Okay. While back in 2006, you see here is from another model, is the ENL and EFL, English as a native language, English as a foreign language. It's more like the arrow linking ENL and EFL. So the interrelationship and the dependence of the latter on the former. While Jenkins later updated this model, yeah, that's more like a continuum model. But this is again, ELF, English as a lingua franca, is more like fluid, it's moving, okay, and probably does not belong to, yeah, ENL or EFL, right? It's more like fluid, dynamic, floats freely and independently in the space between. All right. So very quickly, those questions for people, if you want to share something, if you feel free to type, or feel free if you want to turn on your mic. So the first question is, do you think that Western countries, I put the quotation marks, right, force others to depend on English and take advantage of the new cultural and economic opportunities that this provides? Yeah, that the use of English. Well, the second issue is that, do you think the English you have learned, yeah, your own English learning experience could facilitate you for intercultural international communication? If not, what kinds of English should people teach and learn? Okay, so those questions, if you feel free to type, yeah, if you want. I'll wait for about 30 seconds or 1 minute. Yeah, so I hope my internet is okay. That that those questions um, that we talk about linguistic imperialism, or whether English as a global language, as a lingua franca, provides more opportunities for people. And the second one is about your own learning experience, right? So feel free to type while I can move to yeah, the sociolinguistics perspective. So
Okay,
I don't
Dr.
know.
Fan Fang.
Yeah, yeah.
Hello. Yeah, can you hear
Hello,
me?
hello. Yes, yes.
Yes. I think for the first question, yeah, it is not fair, yeah, to force people from other countries who also speak English to use their native, yeah, or Western English or American English or British English, because English is becoming more international or becomes a lingua franca. But it happens, yeah. It is in the reality. For example, when we write an articles to be published in British-based journals or American-based journals, and of course they will look at our English as a foreign English, and they ask us to revise or edit our English to match what they like, their style. Yeah, so
Exactly.
yeah, they are not happy with the internationalization of English. Yeah, but my question is that, yeah, for us it is very okay to teach English using our local culture. Yeah, for example, Indonesia, we teach English using Indonesian culture. I think it's already implemented in the textbooks, yeah, for junior, for high schools or for university purposes. But the theory of the connection, the relationship between language and culture, does it still exist?
Mm-hmm.
So far, we believe that we cannot teach a language without teaching the culture. But in World English view, it is difficult to define. Yeah, which English do we
Exactly.
teach and which culture do we teach? What do you think? Yeah, thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you for this question. I definitely I agree with you. Yeah, Park Sapnil. It's very complicated, especially from the World Englishes and ELF perspective, whether the fixed relationship of language and culture is is always the case, while it cannot be, right? If, especially when we talk about there is no single language and no single culture. While I also agree that it's very important to incorporate local culture in ELT, but again, the methods, right? The theory, it's still very so-called Western oriented. So it's very important for local teachers, lecturers to have our own voice, to foster students to develop those critical thinking when we teach language and culture from a critical perspective, and from like what some people all argue this culturally responsive perspective of language teaching and cultural teaching. So I think this contextualization of ELT is also very important. So if I make a brief comment based on WhatsApp news, yeah, very important one. Thank you very much. I don't know if other students or lecturers, if you have any comments to make, or we can discuss, yeah, later if I. So I'll just move on. Yeah, so those are the good starting points. And later, I think we can incorporate those questions in the class if people to discuss together. So sociolinguistics, I put this from a very broad area, the dialectology, language context, language developments. I think those will be covered in this course. Yeah. So levels of linguistic variation, the main levels on which the Englishes of the two diasporas. The first one is the first diaspora that is from the native spread, UK to the US to Australia, while the second diaspora is the post-colonial, the colonization of, the spread of English. So we know that there are different accents, pronunciation from the phonological level, grammar, vocab, and also discourse style, the morphosyntactic levels of English. So so if people are interested in, people are encouraged to study a certain variety of English to codify, right? To the phonological level and morphosyntactical level. So some general features of nativized English, we'll see the zero marking for plurality, right? The zero marking, and also the specific, non-specific versus definite and indefinite, right? So those examples, I'm not going to read everything. Yeah, zero marking of third person singular, and aspect versus tense system, showing whether finished or still in progress. Okay, and extension of progressive to stative verbs, and all-purpose question tag, isn't it or is it? Extensive use of code switching, etc. So some examples of Indian English. So that is from the article, one article published in English Today. Yeah. So the use of face cuts, important tempo, chase in the friendship weightage. So those were used, right? The whole soul, for example. Okay, so that is the meaning. Yeah. So those were explained in that case. And also from another book, the Hong Kong English, we also see some varieties. Yeah, I'm not going to explain everything. Like for example, ABC in Hong Kong English is American born Chinese. Okay, Big Brother, for example, is the kinship if you are the elder brother, and also it also has a special meaning in the Hong Kong the society. Yeah, and also some localized use language. Pole, this is a type of tea, and char siu, this is a type of food. Roast, food. Also at the end, a very quick summary is that language, when we talk about language use, we need to have those new blood from other tongues, okay? The diversity, okay, of language, the content of language. Again, whether people need to stick to the pure use of English, the purism ideology of English. So this is another issue, for people to discuss and debate from a sociolinguistic perspective. Okay, I think it's good. So I'll spend about like 15, 20 minutes on another one is about accent identity and intercultural communication. I think it leads to the first section. All right. So again, if people are interested, if people would like to share some questions, the first one is, when speaking English, how do you feel? If someone mistakenly regards you as a native speaker of English, I'll just leave the first question. If you feel very happy, or if you feel it's all right, nothing, or whether you have such experience yourself, yeah, whether some regard you as a native, if you have real intercultural encounter, I think it would be very good. And I don't know if you recall, or in the future, that how would you respond the situation of this bit? Yeah. So I also interview. Uh-huh.
Many will be proud about it. Yeah. If we people regard them as the native speaker. But yeah.
Thank you. Right. So in my PhD study, yeah, well, some people say, yeah, just so, right? So in my PhD study, I also interviewed my participants this question, and it's very interesting. I did have like various answers. Some people feel very happy, feel very confident, and that it is, some participants would say that it means that I am a successful language learner, or it means that I don't waste my 10 or 15 years of English learning time, something like that. Okay, very interesting. So another question is, how do you feel about when you have a local accent? If for Chinese, if I feel I have a Chinese accent of English, or in Indonesia, for example, if you have your own local accent, so this is an example, right? A Chinese English accent from my perspective. And if you're from an Indonesian, or your local English accent, how do you feel? So I also interview my participants this question. And again, people would say that, wow, if you speak English with a local accent, it means my English is bad, right? I don't pronounce well, something like this. So I think, yeah, this can be a research topic if you interview and then you just ask why, right? Even if you use English to communicate to people without any difficulty, why do you need to sound like a so-called native speaker of English? I don't know, right? So accents, again, the definition is a distinctive way of pronouncing a language, especially one associated with a particular country, area, or social class. Okay, I think, yeah, it's about social class, probably. We talk about the privilege, put quotation marks, right? Accents refers not only to the articulation of individual sounds or segments, but to suprasegmental features as well. Yeah, intonation, stress, pitch, etc. So again, it goes to the complexity of whether there exists something like British accent or American accent or other accent. It's very difficult to define. So Lippi Green, in the second edition of her book, put forward that linguistics have struggled to find an accurate definition of the word accent, and for the most part, given it up as a bad job. So generally, accents can only be understood and defined if there is something to compare it with, right? So that goes to the question of accents and identity. Okay, so goes back to the question about how you feel when someone mistakenly regards you as a native speaker of English. So it goes to identity, right? What type of English speakers or what kind of speakers would you perceive, pursue, right? So accent or certain pronunciation signals a person's social status and constructs that person's identity in certain ways. So it goes to the question that how do people define the native speaker or the native accent, right? So English use in the UK, for example, is complicated. We talk about Scottish, English use in Scotland, English use in Liverpool, English use in London, English use in Newcastle, etc., etc. So very complicated. That it's very difficult to label people. Yeah. Although we know that pronunciation goes to social status, goes to identity. So the concept of identity, for example, in psychology, sociology, anthropology, and philosophy is like the conception, qualities, beliefs, and expressions that make a person. It's about self-identity. How do you see yourself or a group? Okay, so particular the social category or social group. That's again when we label people as a group, native speaker of English or non-native speaker of English, for example. All right. Um, Norton's definition of identity, like, is very highly cited. Is that how a person understands his or her relationship to the world, how that relationship is constructed across time and space, and how the person understands possibilities for the future. Identity construction must be understood with respect to larger social processes marked by relations of power that can be either coercive or collaborative. So this is a book that I also recommend my students to read by Eva Hoffman, Lost in Translation. So I quoted one sentence in the book is that I'm fearful of trickling beyond my boundaries, fearful of metamorphosing into full selves. What counts for me is not how much I can get out of myself, but how much I can truly take in. So you can see the negotiation and the reconstruction of a person's identity. Yeah, in this case, when she immigrates to a new country, a new context. Okay. So we talk about pronunciation with RP. Yeah, this is the traditionally standard, regarded as standard pronunciation, right? In language uses British English pronunciation, right? Language teaching classroom. But the question is, how many people in the UK really speak RP? 3 to 5%, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, or more than 15. Yeah. So if we see this as a dialect, the borders, right? It's suggestive, of course, but this is a very general first glance of the complexity, diversity, even within the British Isles, and even just in England, right? So we know, if you guess, yeah, the first answer is the 3 to 5%, and even not as many as 3 to 5%. So yeah, the various dialects in the UK. Standard is actually related to power and ideology. Again, from a sociolinguistic perspective, those concepts should be, we should bear in mind that when we talk about standards, right, we talk about ideology, that goes to power. Yeah, so language ideologies labeled cultural ideas, presumptions, and presuppositions with which different social groups name, frame, and evaluates linguistic practices, while standard language ideology is defined as a bias toward an abstracted, idealized, homogeneous spoken language, which is imposed and maintained by dominant block institutions, and which names as its model the written language, but which is drawn primarily from the spoken language of the upper middle class. Again, from a sociolinguistic perspective, we really challenge, the standard language. We challenge the standard ideology illusions, for example. While standard language ideology also reflects political and cultural power, and within a process of economic, political, and cultural unification, while in reality it's far more complicated, right, in terms of language use, in terms of the situation. So that was a piece of news by BBC that Chinese find learning English as SNP. That's that is the story that some Chinese learners of English found that they could not pronounce certain sounds when learning English, and they decided to have this tongue operation. Yeah. So very, I don't know. That's another question is, do you think this is a good way to improve your spoken English through tongue operation? Okay. So have you thought about seeking tongue operations to improve your English? Sorry, yeah, your English. So that is again news reports by BBC. Yeah. Again, some people may have different understandings of this one, right? So cultural identity, people recognize, right, each other, whether they belong to the same social group or that group's identity. Yeah, when people share similar accents, vocabulary, discourse patterns, etc. Right? But of course, we have the geographical variation, the dialect. We have temporal variation, time and generation. I think the language use. So not only English, we talk about language in general, right? It's changing across time and across generation, right? So language is changing all the time. Yeah. Think about, for example, I think I can have my example of Mandarin Chinese. I can have example of my dialect, and maybe if we have speakers, you think about Thai language, think about Bahasa Indonesia, think about your old dialect, Javanese, for example. I think it's all changing, right? Across time, across generation. And also socioeconomic variation, depends on social class, status, and also the individual variation, gender, age, right? That, for example, in Thai language, we have the car and club difference, right? So when we say Sawadee ka or for female and Sawadee ka for male, so etc. etc. So all goes to the idiolect, that is the language use of the individual language use, the language use typical of an individual person. So an individual's idiolect may be affected by contact with various regional or social dialects, professional registers, and in the case of multilinguals, various languages. Okay. So those factors affecting idiolects goes to like where have you lived, where did your parents grow up, where were your friends, and how did they grow up, where did they grow up, and what languages do you know, etc. etc. Yeah, the linguistic and social factors that goes to the cultural identity, that goes to the question of language culture connection, whether one language equals one culture. or whether culture is regarded from a national perspective. Like for me, from sociolinguistics perspective, those are not always the case. So individuals assume several collective identities that are likely not only to change over time in dialogue with others, but are liable to be in conflict with one another. All right. So it's very complicated. Yeah, the language culture relationship, and whether the representation of culture, for example, in textbooks, for example, in ELT, should always be nationwide, basically the national culture. Okay. How about the local cultures? Because, like, I know we have various local cultures. So whether those local cultures or those minority languages should be included in curriculum, for example, right? For me, the answer is yes, but how? This is very complicated. In many mainstream textbooks and mainstream teaching methodologies, the local cultures, minority languages were neglected, largely neglected. Okay, so acts of identity, how do we perform our language to demonstrate, to display our cultural stance, to be recognized as the same, yeah, belongs to the membership. Okay, the acts of identity, ways, the way in which speakers display their cultural stance toward their membership in a specific culture and towards the culture of others through the use of language. By crossing languages, speakers perform cultural acts of identity, and this is a book, right? Again, investigated the Creole-speaking Caribbean and also West Indian communities in London to lead them to re-examine concepts as a language, correct usage, race, and ethnic groups, etc., etc. Okay. So again, identity of language learners, time limits, I'm not going to do this as an activity, but I think later you can think about, right? How about you yourself as a language learner? How do you describe yourself? Put some adjectives here, whether confident, for example, okay, optimistic, for example, or lazy, for example, or hardworking, for example, etc., etc. So you can put various adjectives to describe yourself as a language learner. So this activity can be done later if you have time in your class. Or when learning a new language, I am, for example, curious, for example, motivated, for example, indifferent, etc., etc. That's an activity. Yeah. How do you feel yourself? Language learner. So identity and language learning, recognizing language as a social practice. Identity highlights how language constructs and is constructed by a variety of relationships. Because of the diverse positions from which language learners can participate in social life, identity is theorized as multiple subject to change and a site of struggle. All right, not only in language learning, but in daily life. Yeah. So identity and language learning, we need to recognize, right, the issue of power. Yeah, it's those are influence the diverse conditions, yeah, relations of power. I'm not going to read everything, right? So engaged, yeah, language learners are engaged in identity construction and negotiation. But the structural conditions and social contexts are not entirely determined. So we are human beings, we are language learners, so we can learn language through our own human agency. So some people, yeah, researchers are researching like teacher agency, learner agency. Yeah, we are not passive learners of language, right? So language learners who struggle to speak from one identity position may be able to reframe the relationship with their interlocutors and claim alternative, more powerful identities from which to speak, thereby enabling learning to take place. Yeah, that's the theory by Norton. Is the understanding of learner investment. Okay. So again, time limit, I'm not going to read everything. So it goes to the issue, yeah, just now, language and culture. It's very complicated of the definition of culture as well, right? So culture and language ideology. So here, learning, teaching a foreign language or culture implies taking an ideological view of the world beyond our own cultural borders, which reflects the way we perceive ourselves within our own culture and its position towards the other. So the question put forward by Jenkins is, how do we respond in our own teaching, to an academic culture that is becoming more and more globalized, and the needs of students with diverse linguistic and cultural backgrounds? So this is more a question for lecturers, for teachers to think about, okay? So a very helpful model, okay, so Byron's model of ICC, intercultural communicative competence. So he put forward the 5 savants of language learning skills: education, knowledge, attitudes. Yeah, so here the model, they are intertwined with each other. So we need to have linguistic competence, sociolinguistic competence, discourse competence, intercultural competence, etc. Yeah, for language learning. Okay, so I'll skip this bit. So the last one is how do you evaluate yourself as an intercultural global citizen? We talk about features, we talk about qualities of intercultural citizen. Okay, so that is the definition of intercultural or global citizenship education. Causing, facilitating intercultural citizenship experience and analysis and reflection on it. For example, yeah, activities that involves working with others to achieve an agreed end, creating learning change in the individual that goes to cognitive, attitudinal, behavioral change, and change in self-perception, change in relationship with others, etc. The model of global citizenship, that is basically you learn another foreign language, understand, respect, learn, understand, and respect various ideologies, linguistically, culturally, and politically, and be able to transcend one's identity to go across borders, both geographically and politically, be aware that culture and identity are fluid, constructed and reconstructed upon various contexts, and also be reflexive and critical on what has been learned and seen. This is about the self-awareness and awareness of others. So I'll sum up with this bit. This language is a practice that constructs and is constructed by the ways language learners understand themselves, their social surroundings, their histories, their possibilities for the future. Okay, I'll stop here for this talk. So I welcome any comments and feedback.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Phan Phan. Okay, now let's continue with the question and answering session. Let's open the first session with 3 questions from the participants. Would you like it to answer it directly after they addressing the questions, or how?
Yeah, I can answer like one by one, or feel free, like if you doesn't need to be a question. It can be some comment as well, based on your experience.
Okay. Let's invite the first participant for the question. Maybe they still formulate the questions.
Okay, I have the question.
From Prof. Okay.
Yeah. My question is, how important do you think the knowledge of sociolinguistic for a language teachers in Asia? Yeah, because when the president of Singapore said before that, when I speak English, I want people to know that I am from Singapore. I am from Singapore. So it seems to me that for him, it is not important to be like native speaker, because English is not American language anymore. It is already global. So we may think that it is important to show that we are not a native speaker of English, but we speak English with our own accent. So yeah, this is complicated. Yeah, whether or not to be like a native speaker of English. So my question is, how important is the knowledge of sociolinguistics, yeah, for a language teachers in our area, not in Europe or America, Australia?
Okay. Thank you, Park, for this question. I think for me, it's very important if we have the sociolinguistic knowledge, and not only from the World English perspective, not only from accent identity perspective, but more than that. For example, multilingual, multicultural, for example, language use, language contact, Pidgin, Creole, the language, the diversity, the complexity, etc., etc. I think we, for lecturers, we don't really teach language as a subject. The skills, the listening, speaking, reading, and writing skills, I think it's part of it. But more importantly, I also had a quote in one of my papers that we need to foster students to evaluate and to pinpoint those issues and questions through language use. And probably standard English or the Anglophone English is not the only way to solve those issues when we use a language, a certain language or linguistic resources to deal with, to solve our daily problems or various issues. I think this is more important, and that goes to knowledge of sociolinguistics to deal with the real life, the realistic common issues question. I think for me, especially in Asia, for example, in ASEAN area, where English is used as a common language, it's quite impossible, and for me, it's not necessary for people to speak like one form of language, because we don't really compete our pronunciation or our accents, right, to what certain standard. We use English to deal with, to solve real life problems. So it also goes to identity issue, that whether people feel that they are empowered when learning or when using that language. So I just make very quick comment on this issue. Yeah, it's very important, and it's, of course, it's complicated, right? Okay, I don't know. Yeah, I hope that I answered this question. It's just my experience and my comment.
Okay, another question. on the participant.
Or feel free if people like to have some further discussion with me. Show my email address. This is my email address. So feel free if you just drop me an email if you are interested in the topic, and I can share my PowerPoint with you, no problem.
Great. CN China.
Good morning, Professor Fang.
Hello.
Sovan. Sir Van Fang, can you stop share, Sir Van Fang, Mr. Van Fang?
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, Professor Fang, I'm Savan from Cambodia.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
I'm also interested in your presentation on English language in different circles, right? And I don't remember which circle, English circle for Cambodian, but my question is, how can we in one community move from one circle to another, and is social linguistic play a significant role in helping moving from a language from one circle to another circle? Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for this question. And from this circle perspective, from Catherine's perspective, I believe that Cambodia also belongs to expanding circle because English is used as learned as a foreign language. But again, as I mentioned, this is not a perfect model, right? That sometimes a certain speaker in Cambodia, that he or she could speak English very well, even as a so-called native speaker of English. So individually, we cannot simply categorize a person through a circle, whether the person belongs which circle. And some scholars also mention that, for example, in Germany or Sweden, again, it's very difficult to categorize whether those contacts belong to expanding circle or outer circle, right? So some countries, yes, they are moving from expanding circle or the outer circle. Yeah, the categories is blurred, and this circle is just a very general model to categorize whether the function of English, whether English is used as a native language, second language, or foreign language from a very general macro perspective. But individually, it's more complicated. Yeah. So like for me, it's not really suitable to categorize individual speakers, whether he or she belongs to which circle. And yes, gradually, one country those countries may be moving, right? Between one circle to another. It happens, right? From a sociolinguistic perspective, from the local context perspective, but probably it's not about sociolinguistics itself. It's just about language use, the natural language use, and also the status of English. And it's long process. And yeah, that's my comment. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Doctor. Yes, I do agree with you because in Cambodia, still, some educators disagree one another with the circle. Even Cambodian circle of ourselves, we sometimes disagree that we should in this circle, we should in that circle.
Yeah, it's just the categorization. So in reality, probably, I don't know. Yeah, it's not really important to categorize. It's just a very general way of labeling those countries and contexts.
Okay, thank you, Sofan, for the questions. Is there any other? Would you like to address the question, Chenda?
I'm leaving it in the chat box.
Oh, the chat box.
Yeah, okay. I'm just reading the question here. Learning a second language requirements. This is I think this critical period, right? Speaking like speaker, non. Okay, I think thank you for this question. I guess that the question is about whether speaking as a native speaker is more understandable or it's more like intelligible. To some extent, it's true. If you want to acquire native speaker accent, you study in an early stage, but also there are various sociolinguistic, the social factors that where you grow up and what type of language that speakers who you are speaking with, etc., etc. And also, speaking like a native speaker goes to the pronunciation accent is one aspect, but also about lexical grammar, etc. And some empirical studies also found that native speakers of English are not the most intelligible ones in real life communication. So their accent is not the most intelligible one. Yeah. So if you are interested in Professor David Durterding has published some books on the topic of the intelligibility of English use in ASEAN. Yeah, and misunderstandings of English use in ASEAN and some empirical findings, and also Jenkins' book, okay, Jenkins' study also found that native speakers of English are not the most intelligible ones, surprisingly. Okay, so it does not mean that speaking or sounding like a native speaker makes a person more intelligible. And it does not mean that if you do not sound like a native speaker, it's less intelligible. There is a certain standard or certain norm. It's about how do you measure the successful communication, the emergent communication. How do you understand if you are communicating, speaking with different interlocutors? Yeah, in this situation, in that particular moment, you don't need to follow native norms, for example, right? Speak English as in like an educated person, yes. And thank you, yeah, Sapnil. It's like native speaker. Again, this label is a simplistic label that because native speakers of English, they also speak with different accents and the education level are quite different, right? So again, all complicated, and findings, studies show that native speakers do not speak the most intelligible English. Yes, thank you.
Okay, any other question from the participant?
Maybe about loss in translation. Yeah, probably Ibu Ira will be interested to hear more about that.
Okay. So this book.
Yeah, about the book.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So based on my knowledge, this one was written by Eva Hoffman, who is a Polish girl, right? I can't remember exactly. She immigrated to the U.S. I can't remember at the age of very early age, and she experienced some intercultural encounters, some misunderstandings in the U.S., and she decided to write her story about the intercultural encounters in terms of language use, misunderstandings, etc., etc. So it's like more like a diary of herself as an immigrant girl. Yeah, I think it's quite popular.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My experience, Dr. Fang, it is more difficult for me to speak English in everyday activities than in academic events, like in a lecture, discussion, meeting. In everyday activities, sometimes or often, I don't have the words to say for a particular object. In a coffee shop, for example, it is difficult for me to speak English in
I also
in
feel
AD.
something similar.
Yeah, maybe because I learned English in academic environment and not in everyday communication.
So one thing I do this, of course, I, I learned a lot. I just experienced some difficulties when I was abroad as well. When I come back, I sometimes force myself, and I also encourage my students to talk to themselves in daily life. That what do you want to go? What is your plan for today? When you get up, talk to yourself. Maybe, right? You don't need to speak in front of the mirror, but you just speak it out. Yeah, you just experience. You just chat daily with yourself. Um, I know some students also create this environment that two of two of us, yeah, we try to communicate in English and we learn English. But I think, yeah, for ourselves, we can also use English in our daily life, try to chat, talk to ourselves. So this is the way, yeah, that we use English for academic purposes, but also we use English for general purposes. Yeah, that sometimes when people go to a restaurant and go to a supermarket, sometimes we just don't know the word because we also have so many localized terms that probably do not exist in English either, right? So I think that also makes the importance of multilingual resources, that we regard language as something as the whole repertoire, the individual repertoire that in our daily life. We don't really need English is one option and it's the only one option. It's not, sorry, it's not the only one option. It's only one of the options that we choose language to communicate. Yeah.
So you did experience the same thing what Prof. Safil ever had in regarding the communication for the daily communication.
Yeah, I think that sometimes we don't understand the menu when we go to a restaurant. I think it's very common, right? Because we have so many local names and foods in local names and local terms. And another case is that people, we go to the hospital sometimes, always very difficult if we get the vaccinated, if we see this, etc. Yeah, the local, the names of, yeah, how do we talk about the names of the medical terms, daily life. But I think daily life is also part of ESP, right? English for specific purposes as well. So it all depends on the use of language, whether you go to a supermarket, whether you go to a hospital, whether you go to a police station to register, etc. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for this. Okay, any other question from the participant? Okay, we still have around 2 or 3 more questions. Okay.
Maybe question from Undiksha students or from Unsia?
From Untirta ya, Prof.
Untirta,
Lecturers
Undiksha.
from Untirta.
Or maybe students from Untirta, Unsia, Undiksha, or from our student from Fatoni University.
I think maybe it might be a bit difficult if students do not have experience of
Yes,
sociolinguistics, if they just started.
yeah. Yeah, and that is the problem also in Indonesia. Teachers teach English in the classroom academically for academic purpose. When they go out of the classroom, they cannot use English. Yeah, because they don't learn the everyday conversation in the classroom, and we don't use English outside the classroom. Maybe it is better for second language environment than a foreign language environment.
I think it also goes to the issue of like feeling less confidence of our own English, because we use learning English as a subject only. We don't really use English, right? I think that we don't feel confident of our use of English.
Yes,
it could be driven from the necessity, necessity in our society.
And also,
we
the so
English
common Cambodian, the same, similar, right? Many,
Yeah, I once asked where a sports center is in Ohio. And they didn't say sports center. They said sports center. So I couldn't catch it. Sports
right.
center.
That's why sometimes the native pronunciation is not the most intelligible. Sometimes.
And a bank teller asked me a question about how do you like the money? And before I answered the question, he offered me a choice. Is 20 is good? Is 20 is good? I couldn't catch it. 20 is not 20. And good is okay. Even I was with an American, but he was long outside America, and he didn't catch it as well. 20 is good. I couldn't catch it. So in Australia, there are many short terms for the common words, like residence becomes a resi, vegetables become veggie, sport becomes sporty. It is difficult, and it is changing all the time.
Good apple. Right? So I think again it's the awareness of language diversity,
and we never meet such words in the classroom.
Exactly.
And even it is in the textbooks. It is not in the textbooks. So how can the students learn it? If they never experience it.
In my case, I offer a course called Introduction to English as a World Language to my students, introducing the diversity and varieties of both native English and post-colonial varieties of English. And also I asked students to discuss various issues of standard language, linguistic imperialism, etc., language policy, planning, etc. I think it's important, again, for lecturers and teachers to raise students' awareness of language use. But again, it goes to the complexity of assessment that again, it's very difficult, right? It's assessed based on the standard form.
Okay, I think maybe it's quite clear, yeah, the presentation from Dr. Fang. So maybe later on the participants will contact you for their own
Sure. Yeah.
private questions. Okay. Okay, I think that's all for this presentation. Yeah, and from the whole presentation that been presented by Dr. Fang, I could catch several things: that language is changing, the view of language is also changing, ideology of language is also changing, and today on we have the view on accent and also the first language influence also in discussion, right? Okay, if there are no more questions, that we shall close this session by saying.
We may share the PowerPoints from Dr. Fang.
Yeah, later on we will share the PowerPoint from Dr. Fang, and I think now I have to give the forum back to the Master Observer. Thank you, Dr. Fang, for the previous presentation.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dr. Fang.
Thank you
very
so
much.
much, Mr.
Yeah.
Meet again. Bye.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, Master of Ceremony, please.
So can I'm just finished, right? So you have another section. So do I need to stay or?
No, it is finished. Yeah.
It is finished. Yes, it is finished.
It is finished. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Just finish, yeah. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming to our general lecture from Untirta, Undiksa, and also our students from postgraduate program of English education. And also especially thanks to Mr. Van Fang, who has delivered general lecture. So, ladies and gentlemen, actually, provide this is for the certificate from Mr. Van Fang, yeah. So we will send to your email, Mr. Van Fang, yeah, Dr. Van Fang. So and for the participants, if you have filled out the attendance list, so several minutes later, I will try to share the Google Drive for your certificate. Yeah, if you have filled out the attendance list that one of our committee has already given in chat box of this Zoom meeting. Yeah, I just wait for 3 or 5 minutes. Oh, okay. Well, actually, I think it's not enough to share the Google Drive here because there is something trouble in terms of connection. So I will give the link of the certificates to the Pak Udin ya, Samanudi of in Untirta, and also in Undiksa I will give to Prof. Artini, and also in Uncia I will give to Pak Iskandar. Ya, betul sekali. That's right. So thank you very much for coming to our general lecture. Let's end by this general lecture by saying Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin, and see you for the next general lecture in the same year, ya, Prof. Ya, there is one more general lecture in the semester. Thank you very much. Ya, see you next time. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you very much, everyone.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Dr. Fernfang.
Mbak.